Welcome to the third JVO video. Today our topic is one that has occupied rabbis for a long time, and that is Israel engagement and loyalty. Meaning, how can we talk about Israel when we're in the diaspora in a way that we're honest to ourselves and honest? Today we have with us Rabbi Alana Suskin. She's a writer, educator, and organizer, and her work has been published in Bridges, Huffington Post, Lilith, and numerous anthologies, and she's a senior editor at Jew School, meaning you're also a blogger. Okay, we also have with us Rabbi Carl Perkins. He is a spiritual leader of Temple Aliyah in Needham, Massachusetts, and under the auspices of the Jewish Community Relations Council, he recently co-chaired a trip to Israel with 19 Christian ministers. And Rabbi Perkins and Rabbi Suskin are going to be representing the conservative points of view. Rabbi Peter Noble has served as a spiritual leader of the Bet Emet and Free Synagogue for 30 years. He's the immediate past president of the CCAR and chair of the Siddur editorial committee, which produced Mishkan Tefillah. And he's written extensively on Jewish practice, bioethics, and Zionist thought. It's been fairly well documented that a connection to Israel serves to inspire young people towards increased Jewish identity. There was a study done on Masa that after a short-term meaning a birthright type program, 79% of respondents said that being Jewish is very important to me. In other words, we're not asking Israel questions, but Jewish questions, as opposed to 53% after only birthright. I don't have the numbers on no trip to Israel, meaning there's a significant increase with increased Israel exposure of being Jewish is important to me. There's a similar increase in the kind of question of it's important for me to marry someone Jewish, meaning that Jewish identity is exponentially increased with exposure to Israel. And I'm wondering why anybody thinks this is. Why should a trip to a country increase Jewish identity, even if you're there for, let's say, a week and then 3, 4, 5 months? We'll start with Rabbi Noble.
Well, it's first of all, a connection to a unique living reality in which you go to a modern, exciting startup nation. And at the same time, you learn something about your history, experiencing things that you read about in religious school firsthand. And simply the atmosphere of being there reinforces a sense of deep connection. I always say that when I go to Israel, I feel rejuvenated, J-E-W.
I would agree. I'd say that in the States, a Jewish identity is an add-on. It's a conscious choice that you make or choose not to make. In Israel, especially young people are exposed to the default identity of being Jewish, and the notion that being Jewish is part of your kinship circle. It's part of your identity. You go to the army, so being a Jew also has very, very powerful personal implications. And so it seems to me it's a very natural thing. We're so used to it, perhaps here in this country, that we take our Jewish identities for granted. But for young people in particular, that's not at all the case. And when they go to Israel, that has a powerful impact.
Can this connection that we're talking about right now, can it be both loving and critical?
Well, first of all, I'd like to be the contrarian of the group to your first question, which is that there has been some fairly good fisking about the birthright type the birthright type trips and the connection to Judaism and Israel. And in fact, what the data actually seems to indicate is that those people who have already had extensive connections to Judaism, when they go to Israel, then their connection is increased. But for people who have been raised as secular Jews or completely unattached, that does not increase significantly. And so I think it's important to, first of all, understand that a lot of those studies are a bit misleading. So the second thing is, in terms of longer-term exposure to Israel, I would certainly agree that those people who do have a connection already and who go to Israel and spend time there, of course their connection is going to be increased compared to other people, right? Because they have a Jewish connection. And I think it is true that the more time you spend in Israel, the more connection you're going to have, but you have to have that piece first. That piece has to be in place. And I think you can see how that might be true when you look at secular Israelis who don't necessarily have a closer connection to Judaism. So that being said, I want to answer your second question, which is, can a connection to Israel be both loving and critical? And I think not only can it, but it must be. A connection to Israel that is not loving does not have room for true criticism. The Torah, well, the Talmud specifically tells us, it comments on verses in the Torah that says you must rebuke, right? But that requirement for rebuke must also come from a place of love.
Are there limits on where and how?
Yeah, I certainly believe that there are limits, and a loving relationship with Israel can also be, should also be, must also be a critical one as well. But I think as public spokespeople here in the States, we have to be very, very careful at the way in which our words are heard and understood and the implications that people draw from them. And I always feel very differently speaking about Israel when I'm in Israel from the way I feel back in the States. I just think that we have to be very wary. We live in a very dangerous world. Israel lives in a very dangerous world. There are a lot of people who are just waiting to hear even honest criticism in order to exploit it, really, to the detriment of Israel.
I think that one has to choose one's words carefully. One doesn't want to participate in delegitimization. One doesn't want to participate, at least I don't, in some of the more extreme kinds of critiques which can be very much utilized against Israel. But at the same time, I think we have to be honest. I think that one of the things that bothers young people is that they don't understand how some of Israel's values are out of sync with their values. And so it becomes important for us to present a reality about what Israel is, what Israel's problems are, what Israel's shortcomings are, but what the miracle of the reestablishment of the state of Israel is. I mean, I'm an old guy now, and I remember when Israel was established. I come out of the whole two mentality in 67 and so forth and so on, and so my identity was formed that way. That's not where young people are coming from today. We have to give them sufficient background to understand how important Israel is. Then you can offer certain kinds of critiques.
What Rabbi Noble just spoke about, the younger view of Israel, and that Israel's certain things in the way it's run, values into, let's say, contradiction, even the fact of a Jewish state, let's say, a people, which is kind of strange in our everybody melt into each other world, right? Just having a particularistic state as opposed to a universalistic state is anathema, I think. And I think that's what might bother a lot of people. So the question is Israel special in raising the ire in this generation, or is it in general maybe also Judaism in its most traditional form, and some of the sources that actually raise the same ire because it's rather particularistic, and Israel kind of is a place to pin on?
Well, first of all, I want to actually go back and make a comment on your earlier question, which is about the kind of critique. And I agree with both of the other gentlemen on the call, both the other rabbis, that it is necessary to speak with love. But I think when you talk about limitation, that's a very vague term, and it really depends on what you mean by limitation, right? The Talmud says that anyone who can protest against something wrong that one of their family is doing and doesn't protest is held accountable for their family. And if you protest something that a citizen of their city is doing wrong and they don't, they're held accountable for all the citizens of the city. And if you can protest against something wrong that's being done in the whole world and they don't, they're accountable together with all the citizens of the world for that wrong. And I think it's important to think about the fact that it's strategically a bad to hide Israel's problems. Our young people, as well as our adults, are smart people. All people are smarter than that. The American Jewish community has access to a ton of information and can understand nuanced perspectives. And we as a community have been habitually dumbing down our message and saying, we can't take it. Those people, they can't hear that, because if they do, they're going to stop loving Israel, instead of understanding that quite the reverse is true, that when we give a false message and we build a picture of Israel which isn't accurate, right? When when people are exposed to, when Israel is full of human beings and they make mistakes, and when we're exposed to that, and they've been getting a message, no, nothing is wrong, everything is perfect, the response is to push away. And I think that that's not even a little bit. I mean, a significant part of large institutions in the Jewish community is still quite committed to saying there are not bad things happening in the Jewish community in Israel, that the Israeli government does not do anything wrong. And I think that that's something that young people are really, really resisting.
Is Israel have in common with heritage texts or anything else that's particularistic?
Well, I think the fact that there are political consequences of that uniqueness, that's what makes a difference. It's one thing for someone to say, I'm an Episcopalian and you're a Methodist and we can love one another. But if an Episcopalian has the right to own land and the Methodist doesn't have the right to own land, if there are national and political that distinction, that is very, very contrary to what all of us have been raised to understand to be a basic human right, which is the equality of all human beings. So I think the notion of a nation state that is in some way favoring some ethno-religious group and therefore necessarily disfavoring other groups, that's very, very problematic and very, very challenging for people. But I just want to, if I can add one comment to Rabbi Suskin's remark, I want to say I don't think that anyone that I'm experienced with the problems, but I do feel that the question is, in what context does one engage discussing Israel's problems, and in what context does one not engage in discussing Israel's problems? I think that if you see a problem within your own family, you discuss it within your own family. If you see a problem within your community, you discuss it within the community. And I am very uncomfortable with the notion of speaking outside the community to try to get pressure placed on certain places within the community. That's the piece which I think is troubling. I
want to jump in. I would say in the world of the smartphone, the internet, Twitter, Facebook, like me, don't know anything about, there is no such thing as inside and outside. One of my colleagues wrote an op-ed piece in the Chicago Tribune, was criticized severely, said they should have kept it inside. So the question is, where do they keep it inside? JUF News, of course, wouldn't publish that particular thing. So let's say put it in the Jewish Forward. Jewish Forward is online. The article would have been spread across the world in any case. My feeling is that there is no such thing anymore as keeping it within the family, criticizing within the family. In a global world with global communication, and there's a lot of good information out there, there's a lot of misinformation. So the question is, what is legitimate criticism based on real fact, and what is not legitimate criticism based on some political ideology, and that's where I would come down on this kind of an issue.
Are we, meaning the diaspora and Israel segments of our people, are we one community or two?
We are one community, but we have different perspectives sometimes. And I agree with Rabbi Noble. It's very difficult to have an internal conversation of any kind anymore. And I actually think that that's largely what younger people are reacting to, right? Is that there is no real distinction between internal and external conversations. And I think, as you pointed out earlier, there's not even a significant... People who are raised Jewish in our world tend to live in certain communities which tend to be very multicultural, and they don't see themselves as different from their Buddhist or Christian or Muslim neighbors. And even the idea of, seeing themselves as, I won't marry somebody who is in a different faith than me, right, separates them from the mindset of people who are saying, no, we're one community and we don't have connection. Our connection is primarily internal, and that's where the conversation has to take place. Most younger people don't see that.
Well, I don't like the word community. I would say we're one people in various communities. Living different lives, the multiple communities in which we live, but they're not the same, and our experiences are not the same. Living in Israel is different than living in the diaspora. Being Orthodox is different than being secular, et cetera, et cetera. So we have connections that are important, and it seems to me that we have to build on the important connections.
I would echo that. I think raising a child in Israel is not the same thing as raising a Jewish child outside of the country. And we share some things, and other things, frankly, we don't share.
Thank you very much, rabbis. Have a good Shabbat. Thank you. You too. Bye. Shabbat shalom.